welcome to my studio. My name is Karen Margulis. I'm glad you're here today. I'm going to do a demo for you and I'm going to share a no-fail approach to starting a pastel painting. So if you've ever tried to start a painting and you get in front of that piece of paper, that blank piece of paper, and you freeze because you're not sure where to go or how to start, you have this kind of fear of the blank paper, then I have a solution for you. This is something that I do when I feel stuck, and it always, without fail, gets me started on the painting. That's why I call it the no-fail approach. So I'm going to share with you today a landscape demo. I'm going to do a wet alcohol wash underpainting, and then I'm going to layer the pastels and pull it all together, but I'm going to start with my no-fail simple approach. So come on closer and I'll show you what I'm going to be doing. And I really want to encourage you to stick with me through the end of the video. I know that people tell me that somewhere after about 10 minutes or so into the painting it starts looking like a mess, so that people leave, but I really want you to stay to the end, because every painting goes through the ugly stage. I call it the teenager stage. So stick with me till the end, and that way you can see everything come together. Alright, so let's talk about what I'm going to be painting today. I'm going to be doing a field of lavender. I'm on a lavender kick, so I have been painting lavender and using the same palette of pastels. I'm going to be using a piece of white LuxArchival sanded paper. So if you have not tried this paper yet, I encourage you to give it a try. It's wonderful for wet underpaintings because it does not buckle. You don't need to mount it. You can just use it right out of the package and it will stay perfectly flat. So I'm really enjoying this paper. Here are my pastels that I'm going to be using. So I pre-select my pastel palette before I paint. So I like to go through my bigger box and choose the colors that I think I need for the painting. I may not use all of them, but I like to have a limited palette in advance. And here you can see I made some color swatches of the pastels so that you can see them up close a little bit better. I'll be making a blog post of this video, and you can find it at karenmargulis.com, and then that way you can see this color swatch up close and personal. I'm also going to be using these pastels. These are Diane Townsend softform. This is the purple violet set, and it works really great for lavender. And I'm going to start my painting with these hard pastels. These are Nupastels brand, and this is a Rembrandt, so harder pastels for the alcohol wash. So that's what I'm going to be using. We'll get started right now with the wet underpainting. So let me put this down. I have the no-fail approach. That's what this video is all about. So what is a no-fail approach? How do we do it? Well, what I do is I do a value thumbnail. Small, simple. I really try to simplify my reference photo, and I assign the shapes, and usually try to use between 4 and 7 shapes. I assign each shape a value. I ask myself, is it dark, is it light, or is it somewhere in between? Is it some middle value? And then I make this value thumbnail, and here's the key. I use the value thumbnail to start the painting. In other words, it becomes a roadmap that I can follow. In fact, I take the reference photo down for this part of the painting because I don't want to look at it, because I'll start to put in too many details too soon. Now, the other part of the no-fail approach is the colors that I use for the underpainting, because that is oftentimes where we get stuck. Well, what colors should I use? How should I start? The no-fail approach requires that you use one color family and 4 values of that color. So in this case, I'm using purple, so I'm using a very dark violet, 2 middle value violets, and a light value violet. And that is how I'm going to be starting the painting, by looking at the roadmap and blocking it in with the appropriate pastel. So let's get started. I already used a pencil to draw in those big shapes, again looking at the value thumbnail. And I see that these trees in the distance are going to be the darkest value because these are upright planes. Oh, and I do want to say that I know I didn't really go into detail on how I do the value thumbnails. If you would like more information on how I like to do the value thumbnails, then you can head to my blog, that's KarenMargulis.com, or you can go to my Patreon page. So I've got a lot of information, in fact over 300 videos, and this is Value Bootcamp month. We're in January 2021, so if you want to get more information on that, head on over there. The link will be in the description. Alright, so we blocked in dark. I actually made this foreground a little bit darker than I have it in my thumbnail because I need to hold that lavender in place. So I need to put in some more dirt. So I just took my artistic license out and made that a little bit darker. But now I see that the lightest area up here is the sky. So I'm going to go ahead with my lightest value and block in the sky. I'm actually going to make the sky lighter than this because right now it's going to be a little bit too dark, but I can always modify it. I'd rather have a darker and bolder in the underpainting and then allow myself to modify it as the painting progresses. Now I have the middle value, which is this flat area. And then I have the middle dark area, which is the distant hillside, and which is these upright pieces of lavender. Now I'm going to design them in such a way that they pull the viewer's eye into the painting. So I'm not really going to look at how they are in the reference photo. Instead, I'm going to design them in a way that I have a more interesting composition. Alright, now it's time for the alcohol wash. I'm going to be using just regular isopropyl alcohol. I'm going to be using a stiff bristle brush. This is a Princeton brush for children, and I think it works really well for wet underpaintings. It's nice and stiff, and it allows me to really scrub the pastel in. I'm going to tighten this. I don't know how it gets so loose. Alright, one thing that I want to say about doing the wet underpaintings. Hold on a second, let me just tighten this. Alright, I fixed that. That was annoying. Anyways, I start with the lightest value first because I want to keep my alcohol as clean as I can. But one thing that I want to say about when we are doing a wet underpainting, because basically we're turning our pastel into paint, right? Think of it when you have the brush in your hand that you're painting with paint. That's actually what you're doing. But what do I mean by that? I mean, you're not a house painter, so you're not going to want to just go from top to bottom and then just, you know, wet it down. You want to take your time and make use of the brush. In other words, slow down and really enjoy this underpainting. If you end up with a strong, interesting underpainting, that's less work you have to do with the pastel. When I first started doing wet underpaintings like this, when I was first introduced to it, I basically just wet things down from top to bottom. And I wondered why everything turned into mud and it didn't seem helpful. But then I learned to slow down and to really take my time with the underpainting. Also, I don't mind if things drip. In fact, I encourage the drips. The drips make things interesting. That's what's so fun about a wet underpainting. And part of this no-fail approach, doing a wet underpainting, gives you something to respond to and makes it less scary. In other words, we're starting to cover the white paper, and now there's no longer a fear involved with getting started. Because if we were to mess up and have an underpainting that is not working, we can easily cover it with pastel. But if we end up with an underpainting that does work and that is interesting, why then we have a head start. So now I'm getting into the darkest areas, scrubbing it in, encouraging some drips. Again, with this LuxArchival paper, I don't have to worry about the paper buckling or getting wavy, so I can be pretty liberal with my, although I don't want it to collect at the bottom. So I have a paper towel in my hand to help with that. Now we're coming to the trees. So I'm going to scrub these trees in so that they look like they have foliage. I'm going to continue this dark all the way over to the end. Alright, so there we have our wet underpainting. So we're going to have to let this dry, and as it dries and the alcohol is dissipates, we'll get some drips and things happening, and we'll come back in a few minutes. I think it usually takes anywhere from 20 minutes to a half hour, just depends on the conditions. But we'll be right back after that, and we'll get started with the pastel. All right, it's dry. It only took about 20 minutes. I've put the reference photo back up. I'm going to be looking at the reference photo. I no longer need the little value thumbnail. And I'm ready to tackle this painting. And I am going to, first of all, start by blocking in the darks, or what's the word I'm looking for? Making the darks dark again. Because I'm following the roadmap that I have established here on my no-fail start. So I'm going to take a dark blue pastel. By the way, I didn't mention this, but the pastels I'm using are a combination of Diane Townsend softform pastels, this is one of those, and Terry Ludwig pastels. So wherever I see the dark, I'm going to reinforce those dark marks. Reinforce, that's the word I was looking for. I'm actually going to connect the dark shapes in the distance to the dark area in the foreground. I consider this the dirt. I call this the dirt because it is what is going to be underneath all of the lavender, and it's going to hold that lavender in place. If I didn't have this nice dark shape down here in the foreground, the lavender might look like it was floating on top of the grass or the green. I do know, however, that these trees that are in the distance cannot be the same value as the dark in the foreground, because that makes it look flat. So I do know that I'm going to have to adjust these areas and make them a little bit lighter and make them a little bit cooler and duller. But right now I'm layering several colors that are the same dark value just to make an interesting area of dirt. I'm going to go and put in a dark brownish green, and then finally add some green. And you might be saying, well, isn't that green down there? Well, it is green, but I waited to put in the green till the end of the layering. Add a little bit of that dark green back there. Alright, now that I have reinforced the darks, the next thing that I'm going to do is work from the back forward, because this is an unusual point of view where we're kind of down in the lavender looking up and we see everything in the distance. So I'm going to start by working in the background and then work my way forward. So I'm going to do the sky, but before I put in the sky, I really want to establish these trees and the distant mountains so I know how far to pull down the sky. Now, I know that these trees are in the distance, so they're going to actually need to be a little bit lighter and cooler than this dark dirt in the foreground. So I'm using a blue-green to start the process, and then I am going to introduce a lighter, duller green. So remember, I want to push this into the distance. And I'm just kind of carving out those shapes so that I can have I just want an interesting variety of tree shapes, bushes. I'm adding a blue-gray because this is a duller, lighter, cooler color, so it'll help push these trees in the distance. The next thing that I want to do is put in this hillside that's in the distance. This hillside is even lighter and cooler and duller than the trees. I'm going to start off a little bit darker, so I'm using a blue-gray, and I'm sneaking it behind these pieces of lavender that are going to come on top. Oops. And then I know it needs to be lighter because it's behind these trees, so I need to make it lighter and cooler and duller and fuzzier so that I can create that illusion of depth. If I'm looking at the photo, I see that it's actually much darker in the photo, but I need to exaggerate this so that I can get that really deep illusion of depth. So I'm actually exaggerating what I see in real life. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter, add a little bit of different quality to my marks so I can kind of suggest that there's a little variety of color in those hillsides. Now, the other thing that's happening is there's a little bit of sunlight on the trees and on the lavender. If I look at my photo, I can see that the right side is getting the light, which means the sun is going to be over here on the right, and that will help me decide where I need to put the lighter values. Now remember that no-fail start, I started with big, simple shapes of dark, light, and middle value, and now I'm gradually carving into those shapes and creating a little bit more form to the trees. But I started off with a big, simple shape, and now I'm adding in a lighter, warmer value to create this illusion of sunlight. All right, now I've got all this established. I need to put in the sky so I can establish the type of day it is. Will give us, set the tone, set the mood, set the quality of the light. And it's a blue sky day with a little bit of soft cloud at the horizon. So I'm taking two different values of blue, a cooler blue, a warmer blue, and then a lighter, warm, kind of a bluish green. And I'm layering them together so that they kind of overlap. And now I'm putting in a very, very pale yellow at the horizon to kind of suggest that glow at the horizon, those kind of low cloud cover, haze. Although I want to pull it up into the sky just a little bit because I don't want there to be a halo of color down there at the horizon. Now one thing that I could do is I could blend the sky with my finger, but I like the little bit of purple that's peeking through from the underpainting. So instead of using my finger, I can blend by just going back and forth with the pastels that I use. And by doing this, they sort of blend themselves, which is a good way to go. And I'm using that blue and that pale yellow to carve into the tree shapes and that mountain shape. But I don't want to get too bogged down with this. Definitely have a halo going on. Let's pull up some clouds up in the sky here. I think I will just dip in with my finger and smooth it out a little bit. I don't want to go too crazy. I kind of like that movement of the clouds swirling in the sky because it's going to help create the movement in the lavender. All right, I don't want to get too carried away with too much spending too much time on this background because the real star of this show is the lavender. So we don't really need to make this perfect. This is fuzzy, it's in the background. So let's work on the lavender. So the first thing that I want to do is put in what's behind these lavenders that are in the pieces that are in the foreground, because if you look closely there's a distant field of lavender back there. So I'm going to establish that by using a blue violet because it's in the distance, and I'm using horizontal marks. I'm kind of covering up these foreground pieces of lavender because I know I'll be able to adjust them. I'm going to put in a little bit of a dull violet, like a mauve-y color. Pull that in. And basically following that roadmap. Remember, that's the no-fail approach, so I've got that going for me back there. I'm making horizontal strokes because I want the lavender in the distance to lay flat, because we're not seeing the top of it. We're only seeing we're seeing the top of it rather. We're not seeing the upright pieces. I'm just going to do a little bit more there. Now we are to the point where we can start to work on the upright pieces of lavender. So let's see, let's start by putting in some more of the green. And this is where I kind of look at the photo, but then I don't want to get too bogged down with making it exactly like the photo. Just a little bit of a warmer sunshine, dark green, oops. And now I think it's time to start putting in those larger sprigs of lavender. I'm going to start with a darker value. I'm going to pull it up into the sky. And I'm pointing them in towards this tree area. And I want to have some that are overlapping, some that are hidden down in the foliage. And in this part of the painting, it's more about placing them where they will make a more interesting design and not so much copying exactly what I see in the photo. So I'm having them kind of all point us into the painting rather than out. Although it's good to have a stray piece. We'll put a few stray rogue pieces of lavender. We don't want them to all line up. See these guys? They're all lined up. So I think it'd be good if I pull one up over these trees. That helps to create the depth a little bit more, but again, we don't want them to all be lined up. And I'm starting to press very hard now. If you noticed before in the painting, I was using a fairly light touch, and that's the way I like to work. But when I get down to these final marks, I'm going to be pressing harder. And I'm also going to be starting to create a little bit more detail within some of these lavender pieces. So this is just a little bit darker value, and I'm kind of making some chunky marks to indicate what that is. The little pieces of lavender, you know how they're made up of little tiny pieces. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out some workable fixative. I like to use Blair, very low odor, workable fixative. And I'm going to give a spray along the bottom. We're going to let that dry for a minute. But the reason why I'm doing this is because all this dark dirt area, I want to fix it in place, kind of cement it in place with the fixative, so that when I come back over it with the lavender and the green foliage and stems, that those pieces will, there'll be a little bit of indication of texture. And you'll see what I mean once that happens. But while I'm waiting for that to dry, I want to take a minute to just kind of straighten out some of these areas. I don't know exactly what's happening with this tree shape. I need to fix that. Put the light back in it. Kind of refine the land and the hillside. Get it a little less messy. I don't like that it's such a straight line, so I'm going to kind of indicate maybe some other trees and bushes back there just to break that up. That becomes I call that a worm shape when it's a straight line of any value. Usually it's a dark value, but you can have a light colored worm, and that's kind of what was happening, so I need to break that up. Also, while it's drying, I need to come in and really straighten up my line of lavender in the distance. It needed to be a little bit straighter, and I'm using my finger to soften the edge a little bit so that your eye's not drawn to a hard edge everywhere. Alright, so this should be dry, so we're going to start to let's introduce a little bit more of the green foliage. So I'm using a warmer yellow green because we have the sunlight coming down in this area. We also have other smaller pieces of the lavender, and they actually, if they're catching the sunlight, they actually are getting kind of a red-violet side to them. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of the red-violet in here. On the sunlit side, I don't want to put it everywhere, or else then they'll start to look flat. The Diane Townsend pastels work really well for this because they have a little bit of pumice in them, so they go over all these layers so nicely. So that color helps to promote that glow on the lavender. Now, what I need to do at this stage, I'm to the stage where typically I take a minute or longer and step back away from the painting so that I can evaluate what I need to do for my finishing marks. Because if you get too far and you don't think about what you need to do and where you need to go with it, you end up just painting and not making more than is necessary. So I really like to be more on top of where I'm going with this. So let me take a break. I'll come right back and then we'll finish. All right, now I stepped away. I realized a couple things. One thing is these lavender pieces in the foreground are all going in the same direction. So we need to, and I have equal spacing in between them. See the spacing? So they're a little bit too regular. They're not interesting in the way they're arranged. So we need to break that up. And I think what I'll do is I'll add another guy kind of in here. The other thing that I realized is right now they're all sitting on top of the greenery, meaning that there's not anything kind of hidden. So that gives the feeling that everything's pasted on. So I'm going to need to pull some of the green stuff on top of some of these pieces so that we don't have that feeling of everything being stuck on top. I'm also starting to put in a few more detail on the main players, the big stars, the ones that are kind of sticking up. So I'm making smaller and smaller marks. One thing that I like about this approach of starting with big simple shapes in that no-fail approach is that I get kind of a soft, out-of-focus underpainting, and I can gradually decide where I need to add the focus. And, you know, where you add focus and how much detail and focus you add is entirely a personal decision. You know, some of us like a higher level of detail than others. I could leave it, you know, fairly abstracted if that's what I wanted. But we all need to start in the same place, right? No matter how much detail we end up with. All right, I think that's enough of lavender pieces, so let's move on to the green stuff. And again, remember I said I need to pull some of the green over some of these pieces so that way it doesn't look like they're all stuck on top. So I'm using that warm yellow green, and this time though I'm making some more linear type marks. And we see a little bit of a cooler, kind of more of a grassy green. So we'll put some of that in here. And now I'm starting to think about how I'm going to direct the eye around this painting. So where am I going to put those finishing marks so that the eye moves freely around the painting? First thing I need to do is add some of the green stems. You can see. I'm going to add that with a darker green. Just stick it in here a little bit. That guy's a little bit bent. And then we have those wonderful greens that are kind of lit by the sun. So I'll go ahead with a nice bright yellow green to get some of those sunlit pieces of grass and stems. And this is the part of the painting which becomes kind of tricky because it's like, how much detail do I really want? So this is where typically when I'm painting and I'm not doing a demo, I am constantly stepping back. Like I allow myself to make 3 marks, and then I require that I step back and evaluate those marks. Is it working? What is it doing? Is it taking the eye where I want it to go, or do I need to stop? Do I have too much? Because oftentimes we end up putting in more than we need, and it's not a matter of putting in more, it's a matter of taking away. So I'm very careful at this stage. I think I'm okay with this level of detail right now in the foreground. I really feel like I want to push this background back a little bit more. So I'm going to come in with that lighter blue-gray and just add a little bit more of it. And also I'm thinking that this distant lavender is starting to look like maybe it's water or something. It doesn't look like rose, so I'm going to just put in a few linear marks to say, hey, this is a row. And I think that's going to help. Also, I don't like how straight it is. And it's something I was bothering me before, but I just added a few more smaller pieces of suggested bushes. I think finally I like this idea of some of these wispy clouds creating some movement to the sky. So I'm going to just put in a little bit more wispies with a cream color pastel. I could probably spend a little bit more time on these little lavender sprigs, but again, I don't want to get too carried away. I'll add a little bit of light into their stems. But I think I'm to the point where I have done enough and I'm going to stop. So there you have it, the no-fail approach to a pastel painting. Start with big, simple shapes, assign them a value, create a roadmap, and then gradually add the details until you're satisfied. So I hope you've enjoyed this demo. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. And if you want more of the same, join me on Patreon. We'd love to have you. So thanks for tuning in, and let's paint.